Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep.
The sky had darkened with an ominous fury, the once calm waters now churning violently as the storm set in. The sea roared with power, a force of nature that was neither kind nor forgiving. The wind howled, tearing through the air, its gusts strong enough to send waves crashing over the sides of a ship caught in its grasp. The vessel, tossed about like a toy, creaked and groaned under the immense pressure, its sails snapping and flapping wildly in the wind. The storm had come without warning, and now it seemed to rage with all its might, determined to break the ship apart. From beneath the waves, the mermaid watched in silence, her heart racing as she saw the ship struggle against the storm. The prince, a young man with a crown glinting in the flashes of lightning, stood at the helm, desperately trying to keep control. His face, illuminated only by the occasional flash of thunder, was filled with determination, but the chaos around him was too much. The ship listed dangerously, creaking as it tipped toward the water, and then, as if in slow motion, he was thrown from the deck. His body tumbled into the raging sea, swallowed by the monstrous waves before he could even scream. His form disappeared into the darkness of the ocean, leaving only the chaos behind. For a moment, everything felt still. Time seemed to freeze, the world holding its breath as the sea continued to roar. The mermaid's heart clenched with a fierce, overwhelming instinct. Without a second thought, she dove, her powerful tail slicing through the water with practiced ease. The cold hit her like a wall, but she hardly noticed. The world above the waves had been full of violence, but under the surface, there was only the calming pull of the ocean as she swam deeper. With every stroke, she moved faster, her body propelled by a single thought: saving him. She found him quickly, his body limp and unconscious, floating beneath the dark surface of the water. His chest rose and fell weakly, but he was fading fast. The mermaid's heart pounded as she reached for him, pulling him close, her strong arms cradling his body against her. The coldness of the sea stung her skin, but she barely felt it. Her only focus was on the prince, whose life now rested in her hands. As she swam toward the surface, the weight of his body pulling her down. The storm raged on, above, but below the water, everything was eerily silent. The waves above were ferocious, crashing and tumbling, but down here, there was nothing but the sound of her own breath and the rhythmic beat of her heart. She swam toward the shore, each stroke an effort against the growing fatigue, the pain of his weight pulling at her. But her determination kept her going. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the edge of the shoreline came into view, a faint glimmer of land through the swirling water. The mermaid's arms, now aching, struggled to keep the prince afloat, but she pushed herself forward. As she reached the shore, she gently pulled him up onto the sand, her tail fin still submerged in the water as she knelt beside him. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with the aftermath, the air heavy with salt and the scent of the ocean. The prince was still unconscious, his body cold and wet, but alive. She sat beside him, watching as the first light of dawn began to break across the horizon. His chest rose and fell gently, the calm after the storm almost surreal. Her heart fluttered with hope, but there was something else, a weight she couldn't place. She had saved him, but at what cost? The mermaid stayed by his side, her thoughts drifting like the waves that had once tossed the ship. She didn't understand the feelings swirling inside Hertha. Fierce desire to save him, the pull to be near him, the inexplicable bond that already tied her heart to his. She had done this for him, for love, for a hope she couldn't quite explain. But now, as she watched him breathe, she realized that her actions had changed everything. There was no going back. The world she knew, the life she had once had, was gone. The price for her act of saving him, of moving beyond the realm of the sea and toward the world of humans, was still unknown to her. As the prince's breath steadied, the mermaid slowly backed away. She was torn between the need to stay and care for him and the recognition that she had made a choice that would take her away from everything she had known to a place where she could not turn back. The sea had always been her home, her refuge, her world, but here, on the shore, a new world was unfolding before her. She looked out to the horizon, where the storm clouds had begun to part, allowing the sun to shine through. The sky was calm now, a soft pink and orange glow over the water. She breathed deeply, feeling the peace of the moment, but also the weight of the future pressing on her chest. The prince began to stir, his eyes fluttering open, and she felt her heart race. Would he see her? Would he recognize her as the one who had saved him? Or would she remain a stranger in his eyes? Her body trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of the decision ahead. What would she do now? What was her future in this strange new world? The morning sun began to pierce through the thick clouds that had once loomed over the sea, casting golden beams of light across the water. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with moisture, and the prince's body, still prone on the shore, began to stir. His wet clothes clung to his frame, his face pale and drawn from the experience. The mermaid's heart raced as she watched him, every muscle in her body urging her to speak, to tell him that she had saved him. But her silence remained oppressive and thick. She watched him closely, her gaze soft but filled with an indescribable yearning. She wanted to touch him, to reassure him, but she knew she could not. She could not speak the words that came so easily to her before, the words that had been the language of her world, the language of the sea. Her voice was gone now, exchanged for legs, exchanged for a human body, and with it she had lost the essence of herself. Her throat ached with the absence of her voice, and the pain of this loss felt like a constant pressure on her chest. Her tongue felt heavy in her mouth, as though it could never form the words she so desperately wanted to say. She reached out a trembling hand toward the prince, as if offering him everything she had, her heart, her soul, her voice, but all that remained was a silent longing that echoed in the depths of her being. The prince's eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused at first, his head still clouded with the aftermath of the storm. The mermaid held her breath as his eyes scanned the horizon, then flickered toward her. She had never seen such a look in his eyes before, dazed, confused, and yet filled with something else she couldn't quite place. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the weariness of a man who had survived something beyond his control. His lips parted as though he meant to speak, but the words never came. Instead, he seemed to gather himself, pushing himself up onto his elbows, his body still heavy from the sea's cold embrace. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, her with a deep, silent yearning, and he with a look of confusion. He was alive. He was breathing. She had saved him. But in saving him, she had taken a step into a world where nothing was certain and nothing felt familiar. The prince's voice finally broke through the silence, though his words were faint still, touched by the fog of unconsciousness. Who are you? His voice was weak, strained, as if speaking itself required more energy than he had. The mermaid's heart clenched in her chest, the question slicing through her like a sharp blade. She wanted to say something, anything to explain, to tell him that she was the one who had saved him, to share the story of the storm, to express the love she felt, but her throat remained silent, no words leaving her lips. It was a cruel irony. She had wanted this transformation, had sacrificed so much to be human, and yet now it was that very transformation that held her captive. Unable to speak, she simply looked at him with wide eyes, silently willing him to understand. There was nothing more she could do. The prince, though still dazed, seemed to sense the tension in the air. He searched her face, his brow furrowing slightly as he studied her expression. There was something familiar about her, but the fog of the storm and the shock of his rescue clouded his mind. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing her arm. The contact was light, tentative, but it sent a ripple of warmth through the mermaid's body, making her heart skip. "Did you save me?" His voice was quieter now, more certain. The mermaid nodded gently, her eyes never leaving his. She felt a strange sense of pride and pain in that moment. She had saved him, yes, but at what cost? She could feel the weight of the sea inside her, the memories of her underwater world, and yet she was no longer a part of it. She was stranded on land, with no way back, her voice lost, her home distant. She would never again swim through the coral reefs or sing to the dolphins. She would never hear the call of the ocean or feel the salt spray against her skin. Instead, she was here, on the shore, watching as the prince came to his senses, and silently suffering in her newfound silence. The prince gazed at her for a moment longer, then pushed himself to his feet, still unsteady, but determined to stand. His hand reached out for hers, and this time the mermaid took it, her fingers trembling as she allowed him to pull her up. The warmth of his hand against hers was a strange comfort, but also a sharp reminder of what she had given up. She was human now, and with that came both the beauty and the pain of the world above the sea. The prince smiled weakly at her, still oblivious to the sacrifice she had made, but the kindness in his expression was enough for her to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this silent connection between them was the beginning of something more. But deep inside, the mermaid knew that the price for love was more than just silence. It was the loss of a part of herself she could never retrieve. It was the beginning of a journey into a world where she would have to live without the things she had known, without the voice she had once used to sing to the stars. The silence between them felt heavy as they began to walk together, the prince leading her toward a distant castle that loomed on the horizon. She had saved him, but now she had to face the consequences of her decision, this new life, this new world, and the silence that would follow her every step. The days following the prince's rescue passed in a blur. The mermaid had been taken to the prince's castle, where she was greeted with curious eyes and polite smiles, though no one spoke to her in any meaningful way. Her silence, though noticed, seemed to make people uncomfortable, yet they were too polite to ask her to speak. She had no words to offer in return, and even if she did, they would be of no use. Her voice, once the source of her beauty and song, was now gone, replaced by a mute form, a stranger in a strange land. The air here was different from the sea cooler, dry and always bustling with activity. The castle was large, full of rooms, and halls that echoed with the sounds of distant chatter and footsteps. But the mermaid felt detached from it all. She wandered the corridors, observing the people in their daily routines, but she remained a silent observer. No one sought her company, and she felt the invisible barrier between herself and the world around her growing ever wider. At first, she had hoped that the prince would notice her more, that he would come to understand the depth of her sacrifice, the depth of her love. But as the days stretched on, her hope began to fade. He spoke to her with kindness, but it was the kind of kindness one might offer a curious animal, not a person. He treated her with respect, but there was no recognition in his eyes. She was not the one who had saved him, not the one who had given up everything for him. He had no idea who she truly was, and that knowledge hurt more than she could express. Each time the prince looked at her, she felt the weight of her silence growing heavier. She tried to communicate with him in other ways, through gestures, through her eyes, but all she could do was watch as he smiled at her with kindness and then turned away to attend to his duties. She longed to speak, to tell him the truth, to make him see that it was her, that she was the one who had been by his side in the storm, the one who had saved him. But she couldn't. Her voice had been sacrificed for a chance to be with him, but now it felt as though it was her only means of reaching him. She spent hours alone in the castle gardens, sitting near the flowers that bloomed with the warmth of spring. The garden was full of life, and though the air was full of the sounds of birds singing and the rustling of leaves, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was drowning in silence. The flowers around her seemed to mock her, so full of life, so full of color, so full of expression, but she was mute, her existence contained in her own silent world. One day, the prince came to her while she sat in the garden, a distant look. In his eyes, he smiled, as he often did when he saw her. But this time, there was something different. There was a sadness in his expression, as if he had been wrestling with some unseen burden. "I think of you often," he said quietly, though his voice was soft and distant, like a whisper lost in the wind. "You saved me, but I do not know you. I wish I could understand your story, why you did what you did." The mermaid's heart skipped a beat. His words pierced her like 1,000 knives, but she remained silent, unable to respond. She longed to tell him the truth, to share the depth of her sacrifice, but she could only offer him her gaze, a quiet plea in her eyes. The prince knelt beside her, his expression softening. "If only you could speak," he murmured. "I feel as though there is so much I could learn from you. If I only knew what was in your heart." The mermaid's chest tightened with longing. If only he knew the truth, if only she could speak, if only her voice hadn't been taken away, she could explain everything. But she was trapped in her silence, a prisoner of her own making. There was no way for her to bridge the gap between them. She was invisible to him, a shadow of the woman she had once been, left only with her unspoken love and a deep ache in her chest. The prince lingered for a while longer, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't name. He seemed to be searching for something in her, something beyond her silence, but there was nothing more to give. She could not offer him the words he sought. All she had was her presence, her sacrifice, and the silent love she held for him. When he finally stood and turned to leave, the mermaid remained in the garden, staring at the flowers, feeling the weight of his departure settle deep in her heart. The days passed, stretching into weeks, and the silence between the mermaid and the prince grew heavier, more pronounced. She had grown accustomed to the stillness, though it weighed on her heart with every passing moment. Each day she spent at the prince's castle, her longing for his love remained unspoken, and the price of her transformation became more apparent. She had traded her voice, her home, and her very essence for the chance to live among humans and love the prince. But she now realized that love was not something that could be bargained for. It was elusive, fleeting, and beyond her reach. The castle itself was a world of its own, vast and full of life, yet she felt like a shadow, a mere observer. The prince treated her with kindness, offering her food and shelter, but there was no recognition in his gaze, no understanding of the depth of her sacrifice. He often sought her company, but it was as if he saw her more as a fascinating creature, an enigma, rather than the one who had given everything for him. His attentions were kind, but they were also fleeting, his thoughts always on something else, something beyond her. One evening, as they sat in the grand dining hall, the prince looked across the table at her with a thoughtful expression. He had been speaking of a beautiful princess from a neighboring kingdom, and his eyes sparkled with excitement as he described her beauty and grace. "I have found someone," he said softly, his voice full of quiet joy. "She is everything I've dreamed of, and I believe she will be the one I marry. She has everything I've always wanted in a queen: her kindness, her beauty, her intelligence. I'm so lucky to have found her." The words struck the mermaid like a physical blow, and her heart felt as though it had been torn in two. She had known this moment would come. She had always known that the prince's heart, though kind and gentle, would never be hers. And yet, the pain of hearing him speak of the woman he loved, of the life they would share, was sharper than she could bear. Her sacrifice, her transformation, had been in vain. Her voice, the very essence of who she was, had been given up for a love that was never meant for her. She turned her head, unable to meet his eyes, feeling a lump form in her throat. If only she could speak, if only she could tell him how much she had given up for him, how much she loved him. But all that was left was silence. She couldn't even cry out her grief, couldn't even share her heartache. She had lost her voice, her ability to express herself, and now she was losing him too. As the prince continued to speak of the princess, the mermaid's mind drifted. She thought back to the sea, to her family, to the world she had left behind. The ocean had always been her home, and the creatures of the sea had loved her without question. She had once been free, swimming through the waters with the wind in her hair and the sun on her face. But now she was a stranger in a foreign world, bound by silence, by sacrifice, and by a love that could never be returned. The prince looked at her then, his gaze softening as he noticed her distant expression. "I'm sorry if I've been too much," he said gently, his voice tinged with concern. "I didn't mean to upset you. You've been such a good friend to me. I truly appreciate everything you've done." His words, though kind, felt like another blow to her heart. She was a friend, nothing more. She was nothing more than a silent companion in his life, a figure who would never truly belong to him. She had sacrificed everything for this moment, and yet all she had was the pain of loving someone who would never love her back. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken words. She rose from the table, excusing herself. Quietly, though she knew the prince wouldn't fully understand why. She needed space, needed to be alone with her thoughts, to process the depth of her loss. She walked out into the garden, the cool evening air greeting her like a welcome balm to her burning heart. The garden was quiet, peaceful, with the soft hum of the evening wind rustling through the trees. The scent of roses and jasmine filled the air, but it did nothing to soothe her aching soul. She sat down on a stone bench, her hands clasped tightly. In her lap, she closed her eyes, letting the coolness of the night wash over her. But it did nothing to ease the overwhelming sadness she felt. For the first time since her transformation, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her sacrifice. She had been so focused on the idea of being with the prince, on the dream of their love, that she hadn't fully understood the cost. Her transformation had been physical, but it had taken more than just her voice. It had taken her sense of self, her connection to her past, and her ability to be whole. She had hoped that love would fill the emptiness, that it would make everything worth it. But now, sitting alone in the quiet garden, she realized that love was not enough to fill the void. Her heart, once so full of hope, was now empty, hollow, and aching. The silence around her seemed to deepen, mirroring the silence within her. But then, in the stillness of the night, something shifted. It was a quiet whisper, a faint echo from the depths of her soul. She had come to this world to love, to find something that would complete her. But what if, in the silence, in the loss, she could find something greater? What if this was her path to something more than she had ever imagined? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up, and there, standing before her, was the prince. He had followed her into the garden, concern written all over his face. His gaze softened when he saw the pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice quiet but sincere. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I need to tell you something." The mermaid's heart beat faster, a mixture of hope and fear swelling within her. She couldn't speak, but she felt his words would be important. She nodded slightly, urging him to continue. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for me," the prince said, his voice still soft, "and I realize now that I don't deserve your kindness. You've saved my life, but I've never truly thanked you for it. I think I owe you more than I can give." The mermaid stared at him, her heart racing, but she didn't know what to say. She wanted to respond, to tell him how much she cared, how deeply she had sacrificed for him, but her voice was gone, swallowed by the very decision that had led her here. The prince sat down beside her, his presence warm, but there was something different now. It wasn't love. It wasn't the deep connection she had dreamed of, but it was something. It was understanding, and in that moment, the mermaid realized that love, even in its unspoken form, could still have meaning. The days that followed felt heavier than the ones before, each one pressing down on her chest with an unbearable weight. The mermaid wandered the castle grounds, moving through the halls like a ghost present, but unseen, yearning but unspoken. The prince, though kind, continued his courtship of the princess from the neighboring kingdom. His days were consumed with preparations for the wedding, and the mermaid, once so full of hope, could only watch from the shadows. The life she had dreamed of with him seemed like a distant memory now, a fragile dream that had crumbled with every passing day. She had saved him. She had transformed for him. but now she was nothing more than a distant figure in his world, a figure whose sacrifice had gone unnoticed. Each step she took was like walking through a haze, her body and heart heavy with the knowledge that the love she had given so freely would never be returned in the way she had hoped. She had once believed that love could conquer everything, that it could bridge any divide. But now, as she watched the prince laugh with the princess, she knew the painful truth. Love was not enough. The silence within her grew louder. Every word she longed to say, every thought she wished to express, was trapped behind the invisible barrier that her transformation had created. Her voice, the very essence of her being, was lost forever. The prince would never know the depth of her sacrifice. He would never understand the agony of every step she took on her new legs, the pain that accompanied every motion as she moved through a world that had never been her own. The sting of unspoken words, of silent love, was all she had left. One evening, as she stood at the edge of the castle garden, staring out at the horizon where the sea met the sky, the weight of the choice she had made settled on her like an anchor. The prince's wedding was imminent. She could feel the day drawing closer, and with it, the realization that her place in his life was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a quiet echo that would soon fade away. As she stood there, lost in thought, a voice broke through the silence, the sound of footsteps approaching from behind her. It was the prince, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "You've been so quiet these past days," he said, standing beside her. "I know you've been waiting for me, but I've found someone else. Someone I believe is meant for me. She's everything I ever wanted in a queen." The mermaid's heart tightened at his words, and though she could not speak, she felt the sting of his confession as though it were a physical blow. His voice, though gentle, felt like the final nail in the coffin of the love she had quietly hoped for. The pain was unbearable, but it was a pain she had already known deep inside her, the knowledge that her sacrifice had not been in vain, but it had been unappreciated. Her love had been given, but it had not been returned. The prince turned to face her, his eyes filled with an emotion she could not quite place. "I don't know what to say to you. You've done so much for me, and I owe you my life. But I can't love you the way you deserve. I never will." His voice faltered slightly as he spoke, but the words were final. He did not understand the depth of her feelings, and now he never would. The mermaid stood still, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Her mind was spinning, but her heart was silent, as though it had ceased to beat altogether. She knew this moment had come, the moment where she would have to make a choice. She could not stay and watch the prince marry another. She could not continue to live in this world, in this silence, knowing she would never have the love she so desperately longed for. The price of her transformation had been steep, and now the only way forward was to let go. The pain was almost unbearable, but the mermaid knew what she had to do. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. She could not be the prince's friend, the silent companion, forever. The love she had given so freely was not something she could simply watch fade away. With a heavy heart, she turned away from the prince, her body trembling. She didn't look back. There was nothing more to say, no more tears to cry. Her soul had already been sacrificed, and now she would sacrifice her love. The days following the prince's confession were the longest the mermaid had ever known. Every moment stretched out like an eternity, each one heavier than the last. filled with the ache of her unspoken grief. Her heart, though still full of love for the prince, had become a silent wound, one that she could not heal. The prince, in his gentle way, continued to treat her kindly, but the distance between them had grown too wide for her to cross. His affection, though sincere, was not the love she had sacrificed everything for. The prince's wedding day was fast approaching, and the mermaid found herself in a haze, moving through the castle like a shadow. The sound of the preparations, the bustling of servants, the laughter, the music filled the air, but it all felt distant, as though it was happening in another world, one she no longer belonged to. The castle, once full of hope, now felt cold and empty. Her feet, which ached with every step, reminded her of the price she had paid. But they also carried her forward into the unknown, into a future she hadn't imagined. One evening, after the day's preparations had ended and the castle had fallen into a peaceful silence, the mermaid went to the shore. The moon hung low in the sky, its soft light shimmering on the waves. The cool night air caressed her skin, but it offered no comfort. She walked to the water's edge, her legs unsteady beneath her, and stared out at the horizon. The sea, her home, called to her, its depths offering the peace she could no longer find on land. As she gazed into the vastness of the ocean, she felt the tug of her past pulling at her heart. She was a creature of the sea, and she had given up that world for the chance to experience something more. But in doing so, she had lost herself. Her voice, the very essence of her being, was gone, and in its place, she had gained only silence and sorrow. She had hoped that love would make everything worth it, that the prince's affection would fill the void inside her. But now, as the wedding day approached, she knew that her sacrifice had not led her to the happiness she had imagined. It had only brought pain. As she stood there, lost in thought, a figure approached from behind, the familiar presence of the sea which appeared in her mind before the actual figure came into view. The mermaid's heart fluttered with a mixture of fear and hope. Could the witch offer her a way out? Could she undo what had been done? The witch was silent for a moment, her eyes glinting with an unsettling knowledge of the mermaid's turmoil. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and cold, like the depths of the ocean. "You have made your choice, child," the witch said, her tone both harsh and resigned, "but there is still a way out. You may return to the sea, to the life you once knew. You only need to take the life of the prince." The mermaid's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she whispered, though her voice was barely a sound. The witch stepped closer, her presence darkening the air around them. "If you kill the prince before the wedding, you will regain your mermaid form. Your voice will return, and you will be free. But know this, if you do not, you will die. You will become nothing more than foam upon the sea, your soul lost forever. The choice is yours." The mermaid felt a chill run through her as the witch's words sank in. Kill the prince. The thought was unbearable. How could she ever harm him, the one she had loved so deeply? But if she didn't, if she let him marry another, her soul would be lost. She would never see the sea again, never be able to return to her world. She would be nothing. The silence that had followed her every step now felt unbearable, the weight of her decision pressing on her chest like 1,000 pounds. She could feel the waves of her own internal turmoil crashing against her heart. Her love, once so pure, had led her here. She had wanted to give everything for him, but now it seemed that everything had been in vain. "If I kill him, will I be able to live again?" the mermaid asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Her heart felt as though it was being torn apart, each word she spoke only deepening the wound within her. The witch's answer was simple: "Yes, but only if you act quickly." The mermaid closed her eyes, the weight of the decision bearing down on her. "I cannot," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I cannot kill him. I would rather die than harm him." The witch's gaze hardened, her eyes cold and knowing. "Then you have made your choice," she said, turning away. "It will die with the prince's love unfulfilled, and your soul will be lost to the sea forever." The mermaid stood in silence, her body trembling as she felt the full force of the witch's words. She could not kill the prince, no matter the cost. Her love for him, though unreturned, was still pure. She could not bring herself to destroy what little of him she had left, even if it meant losing everything. As the witch faded into the shadows, the mermaid turned back to the sea, the vast expanse of water stretching out before her like an endless horizon. She closed her eyes, feeling the cool breeze against her skin, and for the first time she truly understood what sacrifice meant. It was not about what she could gain, but about what she was willing to lose. She had given up everything for love, her voice, her home, and now her future. But the one thing she would not sacrifice was her humanity. Even in silence, even in pain, she would remain true to herself as the moonlight shimmered on the surface of the water. The mermaid closed her eyes one final time, knowing that no matter what came next, her love for the prince had been real, and in that love she had found something greater than she had ever imagined it. Deep, unspoken peace that would carry her through whatever lay ahead. The days that followed were a blur. The mermaid wandered through the castle, moving like a shadow in a world she no longer belonged to. The prince's wedding day was fast approaching, and she could feel the pull of the inevitable. The air seemed heavier with each passing hour, as if the weight of her choices had already begun to press down on her heart. Every moment felt like a lifetime, every step a silent reminder of the sacrifice she had made, and the one still before her. The castle was alive, with activity servants bustling around, preparing for the grand event, the sound of laughter and music spilling from the rooms, as the prince and his princess-to-be made their final preparations. She could hear the excitement in the air, but it felt distant, as though it belonged to a world that was no longer hers. She had once imagined this day, the day she would walk beside the prince, her love returned and her sacrifice worthwhile. But now it was a bittersweet dream, one she could not touch. She spent her nights in the silence of her room, her thoughts drifting to the ocean, the sea, the waves, the deep, cool water that had been her home, the place where her voice had been free, where she had once danced beneath the moonlight, the stars above her and the water embracing her. And yet, here she was, on land, in silence, watching a life unfold that she could never fully be a part of. The prince had noticed her more in the past few days, perhaps sensing something different in her, but he could not understand the depths of her pain. He had asked her questions, but her responses were always silent, her eyes holding all the words she could never speak. There was no need for words between them anymore, not for him. He had made his choice. He was set to marry another, and though he was kind, though his heart was gentle. It was not meant for her. One evening, as the wedding preparations reached their peak, the mermaid stood by the edge of the garden, gazing out at the setting sun. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, the air soft and warm with the promise of summer. The sounds of the castle behind her seemed distant, muffled by the steady rhythm of her thoughts. She closed her eyes, feeling the soft breeze on her skin. It was in moments like this, in the stillness of nature, that she found some semblance of peace. But the peace she found was fleeting. Her mind wandered back to the sea, to the witch's offer, to the choice that loomed before her. The prince's wedding was only days away. If she did nothing, if she allowed him to marry the princess, she would lose everything. Her soul would be condemned to the sea, trapped in the waves forever, unable to rise above the ocean's depths. She would be nothing but foam, a fleeting, forgotten whisper in the vastness of the sea. But if she killed the prince, if she took his life, she could regain her voice, return to the sea, and live once more. The price was clear. She could still save herself, still find redemption. The witch had promised her freedom, but at a terrible cost, one she had not yet been able to bring herself to accept. Could she truly bring herself to kill him, the man she had sacrificed so much for, a man who would never truly love her? In the silence of the garden, the mermaid felt a deep, aching sadness wash over her. She had made her choice when she saved him from the storm, when she gave up her voice for the chance to be with him. She had chosen love, and with that choice, she had given up her future, her past, and her very self. But now, it seemed that love would be her undoing. It would be the very thing that tore her apart. As the sun dipped lower, the soft glow of twilight settled over the castle. The mermaid's heart ached with longing, with grief, with a love that could never be returned. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest, the quiet sadness of her love for the prince, knowing it would never be enough. The choice before her was clear: sacrifice him and return to the sea, or let him marry another and lose herself forever. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see the prince walking toward her, his expression filled with concern. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze searching hers. "I've been thinking about you," he said softly. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for me, and I don't know how to repay you. You've saved my life, and I don't understand why you've done it, but I know you must have your reasons." The mermaid's heart fluttered in her chest, but she said nothing. She simply looked at him, silently begging him to understand. She could not answer him, could not explain the depths of her sacrifice, the love she had given up so freely. All she could do was stand in front of him, her eyes holding the unspoken words that would never pass her lips. The prince, seeing the sadness in her eyes, stepped closer, his hand reaching out toward her. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I know I'm not the one you wanted, but I wish you the best, truly." He turned to leave, but before he did, he paused and looked back at her one final time. "I'll never forget what you've done, but I think we both have to find our own way. You deserve so much more than this." The words pierced her heart, but she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply watched him leave, her heart breaking with the understanding that he would never be hers. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. The days had blurred together in a haze of silence and sorrow. The mermaid moved through the castle like a shadow, a quiet observer to a life she would never be a part of. The wedding was days away, and every step she took seemed heavier than the last. The prince, still unaware of the full depth of her sacrifice, continued his courtship with the princess. His happiness was so close, yet she was a distant figure, unable to reach him, unable to speak the truth of her love. As the wedding day neared, the mermaid found herself standing once more on the shore, gazing out at the horizon where the sea met the sky. The evening air was cool, the last whispers of daylight fading into the soft darkness of night. The quiet of the sea wrapped around her like a blanket, but it offered no comfort. The storm she had once weathered had passed, but in its place was a stillness that felt even more profound. The sea, her home, called to her, but now it felt distant, unreachable, as though she no longer belonged to it. Her heart was torn into one part, still bound to the prince, the other to the ocean. She had given up everything to walk this path, to live in a world that was not her own, to give herself fully to the love she thought would complete her. But now, as the prince's wedding day approached, she understood that love was not enough to overcome the distance between them. She could no longer be the silent companion in his life, the one who stood in the shadows, loving him from afar. The witch's words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the choice she had to make. If you kill him, you can return to the sea, but if you let him marry another, your soul will be lost to the waves forever. The decision, once so clear, now seemed impossible. How could she ever harm the one she loved? How could she bring herself to destroy the prince, the man who had unknowingly stolen her heart? The weight of the choice crushed her chest. Every step she took, she could end her pain, return to the sea, regain her voice and her mermaid form, but at the cost of his life. And if she didn't act, she would lose everything: her life, her love, her soul. She closed her eyes, the cool night air rushing past her, and for the first time she truly understood the depth of her sacrifice. She had given up her voice for love. She had given up her place in the sea for a life that would never be hers. She had asked for so much, and now she was being asked to give even more. But could she really do it? Could she kill the prince, the one person she had loved with all her heart? Could she destroy him, the very person who had shown her a world beyond the sea, a world filled with beauty, with love, and with light? Could she erase the life he had built, the future he would share with the princess? The mermaid felt the tears she could no longer shed welling in her eyes, her heart breaking with each thought. She had never wanted to be a killer. She had never wanted to destroy anything or anyone. All she had ever wanted was to love, to be loved in return, to find a place where she could be whole. But now, as the wedding day loomed ever closer, she felt the suffocating weight of her decision pressing down on her. She knew she could not be a part of this world any longer. She could not live in silence, in the shadow of a love that could never be hers. She could not continue to walk the earth, watching the prince marry another, knowing that her heart would remain forever unfulfilled. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see the prince approaching, his expression kind but distant. He looked at her with an unreadable gaze, and for a moment she wondered if he could feel the weight of her pain, the burden of her silence. His eyes softened, but there was no recognition in them, no understanding of the depth of her sacrifice. "I've been thinking about you," he said softly, his voice gentle though it carried the weight of an unspoken truth. "You've done so much for me, and I can never repay you. But I think I need to tell you something before the wedding." The mermaid's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the moment when everything would change? Could he finally understand what she had given up for him? The faintest flicker of hope stirred in her chest. "I'm sorry," the prince continued, his voice wavering slightly. "I know I've been selfish. I've never fully understood you, never truly understood the sacrifice you made for me. But I need to tell you now, this marriage, it isn't what I thought it would be. It isn't the love I thought it was." The mermaid's heart beat faster, a strange mix of hope and despair filling her. Could this be it? Was this the moment she had been waiting for? The moment when he would realize that she was the one he had always needed, that she was the one who had truly loved him all along. But as the prince continued, his words began to falter. "But I can't undo what's been done. I've already made my choice. I must marry her." Her heart shattered. She knew it. Deep down, she had known. But hearing the words out loud, hearing him say them, made the truth unbearable. He would marry her, and the mermaid would be nothing but a fleeting memory, a distant figure in the background of his life. The prince turned to leave, but before he did, he paused and looked back at her, his expression filled with sadness. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I wish I could have been the man you needed, the one you sacrificed everything for." The mermaid stood still, her heart sinking into the pit of her stomach. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run to him and tell him everything she had sacrificed, but the words never came. Her silence, the silence that had been her prison, now felt like a death sentence. With a final glance, the prince turned away, walking back toward the castle, leaving the mermaid standing on the shore, alone with her thoughts. The wedding was still a day away, but in her heart she knew the decision had already been made. The morning was quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to stretch for miles, untouched and still. The mermaid stood at the edge of the castle, looking out across the horizon. The world was bathed in the soft golden light of dawn, the sky painted in hues of pink and orange, and the calmness of the ocean stretched out endlessly before her. It should have been a moment of peace, of clarity, but instead she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. The prince's wedding was just a few hours away, and she knew, deep in her soul, that she had already made her choice. The time had come to make the final decision, one that would shape the rest of her existence. The witch's words echoed in her mind, louder now than they had ever been. "If you kill him, you can return to the sea. If you don't, your soul will be lost." The choice seemed so simple, so clear in the abstract, but the reality was far more complicated. She could still hear the prince's last words, the soft regret in his voice. "I wish I could have been the man you needed." The pain of his rejection had cut deeper than anything she could have imagined. She had loved him so completely, so selflessly, but he had chosen another. In his eyes, she was just a quiet figure in the background, a companion with no voice, no true identity. She had given him everything, and in return, she had only received his kindness, a kindness that could never fill the emptiness of her heart. Her thoughts began to swirl, the silent pain inside her growing more intense with each passing moment. The weight of her transformation was heavier now than ever before. The price she had paid for the chance to walk on land to experience human love was now clear. Her voice was gone, her identity stripped away. She had hoped that love would fill the void, that the prince's love would make everything worth it. But instead, she had learned that love could be painful, could be fleeting, and sometimes it was not enough. The sound of footsteps approached behind her, soft but steady. She turned, her heart quickening as the prince stepped into view, his face serious, his eyes searching. There was a moment of silence between them, a quiet understanding that neither of them could fully express. His presence filled the air, but it did little to ease the heavy burden she carried. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. "I've been thinking about you," the prince said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "and about the things you've done for me. You've saved my life, and I don't think I've ever truly understood the depth of your sacrifice." He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering as he looked at her, though he still did not recognize the true depth of her love. "But now I understand that what you've given me is far more than I could ever repay. I can never repay you." His words, though kind, felt like a knife twisting in her heart. How could he ever understand? How could he ever know the price of her love, of her silence? She longed to speak, to tell him everything, to scream the truth of her feelings. But the silence that had been her prison since her transformation kept her locked in place. The prince reached out, his hand brushing against her arm, his touch warm, but there was still something distant in his gaze, something he could not see. "I don't know what to do anymore," he murmured, looking away for a moment. "I've tried to follow my heart, but now it feels like everything is slipping away." Her heart clenched as she stood there, staring at him, feeling the immense pain of unspoken words between them. She could feel his confusion, his sadness, and yet she couldn't bring herself to explain, to make him understand the depth of her sacrifice. She could not share the weight of her choices, nor could she ask him to bear it with her. The burden was hers alone. The wedding was hours away, and in her heart she knew what she had to do. The prince would marry the princess, and she would be left behind, her love unreturned, her voice forever silent. But there was still a chance, for her still, a chance to return to the sea, to regain the peace she had once known, to become who she had been before, without the pain of unrequited love. As the prince turned away, preparing to leave for the ceremony, the mermaid's heart broke one last time. She knew what she had to do. She had already made her decision. The sea called to her, a distant echo in the back of her mind, a reminder of the world she had lost, the world she could return to. The mermaid's body trembled as the sacrifice weighed on her heart. She could not stay in this world of silence, this world of love that could never be hers. But to leave the prince, to walk away, meant losing everything she had hoped for. It meant choosing a path of eternal separation, of silence, of self-sacrifice. With one final, longing glance at the prince, she turned toward the ocean. The waves seemed to beckon to her, offering her the escape she so desperately needed. The sea was her home, and it always would be. But as she stepped toward the water, something inside her broke. The love she had felt for the prince, though unreturned, had transformed her, and now it was time to let go. Her foot touched the cold water, and she could feel the transformation beginning. Her legs, once human, began to shift, the pain of her transformation once again coursing through her. She would return to the sea, to her true form, but she would also lose the prince forever.